Our keynote speaker this afternoon is Michael Greer, and Michael is the president and CEO of ArtsFund. His leadership experience spans both the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, including executive and management roles in the US, India, and Mainland China. With a B.A. in economics from Hampshire College and a Master's of Education from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and an M.B.A. from the Wharton School, Michael brings a diverse set of skills and experiences to ArtsFund. He is a trustee of Downtown Seattle Association, Inspire Washington, Puget Sound Regional Council, Economic Development District, and this might be where I cut the list a little bit, because there's more.
Too many.
There's more. His most recent position was as the executive director of the Oregon Ballet Theater in Portland, Oregon, and prior to his leadership career, Michael spent 6 seasons as a professional ballet dancer with Ballet West in Salt Lake City, which I had to include because I also dance. So
Nice.
I have to include that. Dear. All right. Michael's going to share a little bit with us about how the arts prepare communities for the future. And this is a theme that we have continued throughout North Sound ACH for a number of years, but we thought it was about time we had someone come and tell us a little bit more about it, who knows what they're talking about.
Thank you so much, Haley. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I will start by just saying thank you for having me, and I'm going to back into a little bit of a story that involves this gentleman right here. Monty, you want to raise your hand? So I would say maybe 7 years ago, when I was the executive director at Oregon Ballet Theater, Monty reached out and introduced me to North Sound ACH. And at the time, I was running, a discipline-specific organization in Portland, Oregon. And I remember feeling so jealous of the opportunity that all of you had in order to approach community health and wellness through the lens of so many different disciplines. And I think that goes for a lot of executive directors and a lot of leaders that are running organizations that are discipline specific, whether they're in arts and culture or health and human services or what have you. Sometimes I think we get a little constrained by knowing that at the end of the day, we need to serve a specific discipline. And so as much as we wanted to be good community partners at Oregon Ballet Theater, at the end of the day, we were selling tickets to a ballet company. Fast forward 6-7 years now, and I have the opportunity to be leading an organization called ArtsFund, which has a much broader scope in regards to what disciplines we can use, still within arts and culture, in order to be able to affect real community change. So I have seen North Sound ACH, and it's been on my radar, and I've been really I've been an admirer of all the work that goes on here for many, many years. And is it Ian? I think the mic is a little hot. Can we turn it down just a little bit? How about now? Perfect. All right. Sounds great. So today, what we're going to talk about is how the arts prepare communities for the future. I understand that the topic of the conference this year is around what we are becoming, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more. But my personal answer to what we are becoming is I have no idea, and I think that for all of us that are here, we are uniquely positioned in history in that we have lived through something, an upheaval that no one in recent memory has lived through. And so had you asked anyone in this room 10 years ago what we are becoming or what we are going to be in another 5, 6, 10 years, we would have all been wrong. And I think that holds for what we are going to be 5, 10, 20 years from now. And so the point of this conversation and this speech today is really around how can we best prepare communities for the unknown unknowns. And at ArtsFund, what we talk about a lot is how we can use art and culture as a tool to prepare communities to be robust in that they're able to weather the unknown unknowns that are coming at us, whether they're economic or whether they're political or social. And so that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start with a thesis here, and we'll go through some data, and then hopefully at the end you all will have come around to my thesis here. But really what we want to say is that a healthy and well-funded arts and culture community creates economic, physical, and community resilience that prepares regions for constructive change and growth. And again, art and culture are not the proverbial silver bullet, but what we have found and what the data hopefully will suggest here is that having access and a well-funded arts and culture community provides a lot of benefits to communities along certain dimensions that do lead to healthy and robust communities that are able to weather, whether it's a pandemic or an economic downturn or political upheaval. So that is kind of the thesis of this talk, and we'll see during the Q&A if you all agree with where I'm going with it. So next slide. How are we going to structure our time together today? We're going to start with some introductions about me and about ArtsFund. I like to start with those in a little bit of detail, not because I like to reiterate my resume for everyone, but because I think that we all have biases, and I have biases that are rooted in my lived experience. And so by being clear with all of you on what my set of lived experiences are that got me to this point will help you understand and really just be able to make sense of the hammer that I am using to to approach this nail. And then you can leave it to yourself to decide, how biased am I being and what direction am I coming from when it comes to talking about a lot of these issues. Because again, everyone is really shaped by how they got to the place that they're at. And so I'm a firm believer in that if I don't know how someone got to where they are, I'm missing part of the puzzle. And then next we'll go into a little bit about ArtsFund, kind of the same principle. I'm here representing an organization that has a set of mission, vision, values. And so to have you all understand a little bit about what that organization is will also help you understand more about where the data is coming from and the lens from which it is being projected. Then we'll talk a little bit about impact of arts on communities. So this will be the data center where we talk about what does it mean in terms of economics, in terms of health and well-being, and in terms of community engagement to have a well-funded and accessible arts and culture sector within your community. We'll go into a little bit about how those three dimensions affect future preparedness for communities, and then we'll move into a conclusion and then hopefully a robust Q&A. I don't know how rowdy the crowd has been up until now, but please write down your questions, ask, and I'll answer what I can, and I'll kick it off to somebody else if I don't know. So next slide. So who am I? Michael Greer. I'm the president and CEO at ArtsFund. I'm a light-skinned black male with no hair, black chunky glasses, wearing a maroon sweater, and sitting in a wheelchair. I give a visual description because we found at ArtsFund that in order to be as inclusive as possible, our community has asked us to include that as a way for individuals to better identify with the speaker and the content. So as Haley mentioned, I started out my life as a professional artist. So I know what it means to sing and dance for my supper, and I think that's really important in terms of a lot of leadership that is working in areas with certain populations. I think it's important to have a firsthand experience of what those populations are experiencing. And so I spent a number of years as a professional ballet dancer, and as many individuals that spend time in the arts or in nonprofit in general, I got to a point in life where I said, if I want the life that I've envisioned for myself and my future family, I'm going to need to find a profession that pays more money. And it's sad, but that is what happened. And so I moved on and got my degrees in economics and math and M.B.As and all that type of stuff, and ended up working for a little over 10 years in finance and commodities and manufacturing all over the world, and had a great time, and really learned a lot about the world around me. Met my wife, who's floating around here somewhere, and had two wonderful children. And when we were living in mainland China, I decided to come back to the U.S. It was really a time to say, all right, so we were coming back. Where am I? We were coming back from China, and really I had the opportunity at that point to then revisit, arts and culture as a way to interact with my community from a little bit more economically stable position. And so I ended up running a couple ballet companies, most recently Oregon Ballet Theater in Portland, Oregon, and then ArtsFund jumped up. ArtsFund is an amazing organization similar to Northtown ACH in that we are able to use a number of different artistic disciplines, and we're able to work with organizations who use arts and culture as a tool for building communities in ways that are not directly centered around, say, dance or opera or music or anything like that. So I have been in that role now for about 6 years, or about 5 years now. And it's been quite a ride, and we'll get into a little bit about what we're learning there and the types of lessons that we're trying to project into community. But if we go to next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about ArtsFund. So what is ArtsFund? At ArtsFund, we were founded in 1969. So we've been around for, well, it's going to be 60 years before we know it. And we were founded as corporate counsel for the arts. And we were founded by Boeing and Weyerhaeuser and a couple of the other major corporations that were doing business in the greater Puget Sound at the time. And it was really forward thinking at that moment, this was post World's Fair, that these major corporations said, in order for us to have a thriving community here in the greater Puget Sound, and this is Seattle, not long before Microsoft, long before Amazon, all of that, if we wanted to have a really thriving community, we needed to have a well-funded arts and culture community. And so they were the initiators of ArtsFund. Since then, we have expanded to, be involved all across the state. We work with corporations, with individuals, with other institutions. And at ArtsFund, our mission is to support the arts through leadership, advocacy, and grant making in order to build a healthy, equitable, and creative Washington. And I just want to talk a little bit about those three pillars of leadership, advocacy, and grant making, because they really are the foundation of what we do at ArtsFund. So in terms of leadership, you can think of that as capacity building. So we work with, just shy of 1,000 organizations across the state, and for many of them, they do not have the internal capacity to really do what their communities are asking of them. And that's where we are able to step in. So we offer convenings, we offer trainings, we're able to bring in groups like the Nonprofit Finance Fund. We did a great convening, was it the middle of last year, where we brought in the community development folks from the Kraken and the Mariners and Seattle Art Museum, and had a big conversation around, like, how does everyone get butts in seats? How does everyone, get audiences, and how would we bring them together? And so we're able to pull stuff together like that in ways that maybe a $50,000 or $75,000 annual budget nonprofit arts organization couldn't do on their own. In addition, we have a number of great programs. One is what's called Board Leadership Training that is going on 25 years now, where we bring in young or prospective board members, most often from the corporate community, and give them a 6-week training on what it means to be an effective board member. Many of you here are in the nonprofit space, and you know that at the end of the day, the board is the fiduciary. They are the ones that are stewards of the mission, vision, values of your organization. And so for the amount of dollars that we put out into the community through our granting, we feel that it is really important to make sure that the stewards of those dollars have an understanding of what best practices are and how they can be used in order to really steward those missions. And so in terms of leadership, that's kind of what we're doing around capacity building. As far as advocacy, we are a 501c3, not a C4, so we don't do any direct campaign advocacy for elected officials, but we are heavily involved in issue-based advocacy. So many of you may know about the Doors Open initiative that just passed in King County, but that was a project that it was going, I think it was 7 or 8 years in total, but we helped take that across the finish line. That will see 0.1% sales tax go to arts and cultural organizations, along with science and heritage in King County. So that's about $100 million a year that will go to the sector because of advocacy that we've helped to initiate. In addition, we were part of the group that brought online the Building for the Arts program, which is a program through the Washington State Department of Commerce, which sees about $18 million go to capital projects across the state of Washington every biennium. So we're active in that level of advocacy, and we're also active in what I like to call white noise advocacy. And so we have, after 55, 60 years of being in touch with a lot of the public, private, and nonprofit decision makers across the state, we have the ears of a lot of folk. And part of my role is really just to make sure that the people that are making decisions across the state are aware of the fact that arts and culture is a significant driver for the people, whether they are voters, whether they are customers, whether they're consumers, whoever it is that they consider their ultimate stakeholders, that the arts matter to them. And so we try to keep that constant noise of the arts matter, and this is why. So in terms of advocacy, that's really what we're doing at ArtsFund. And then grant making. Since we were founded, we've distributed, get this number right, it's $130 million to over 1,000 organizations across the state. And we're very proud of that number. Last year, we distributed about $12.5 million, and we're on par to distribute about the same this year. But as many of you also know, that number pales in comparison to the amount of need that is out there. We're in a world of billions and trillions now, and instead of millions. And so I look a lot of time at our grant making, and all of you are, I'm sure, receiving grants, or maybe some of you are providing grants. As much as the dollars matter, it is also about messaging that the community and the folks that are providing those dollars care about whatever the services that you're providing. And so, since 1969, there's been $130 million worth of messaging from individuals, from the corporate community, and from public sector that have said, this matters to us, and it matters that arts and culture is in our community, and we want to see it thrive. So that's a little bit about ArtsFund, leadership, advocacy, and grant making. Those are the pillars of what we do, and that, again, is what's underlying some of the data that we're going to go through right now. So next slide, please. So now we're going to move into a little bit of the data. And what I want to talk about is the impact of arts on a community. Again, going back to that topic of this conference, what we are becoming is going to be grounded in how strong our communities are. And I think these three pillars of economics, health and well-being, and community engagement, while there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of measure the overall strength of a community, I think these three pillars are very important when it comes to the measure of how strong a community is and how resilient it can be to any type of upheaval or potential change that's coming in. So what we're going to talk about next is we're going to go through a couple slides and talk about what are the actual impact of the arts on these three pillars. So next slide, please. Let's start with the economics. 10.8%. That is the portion of Washington State's GDP that is provided by arts and culture. And that equates to $73 billion a year. And just kind of wrap your head around that number. When you're thinking about, if you were to go on the street and ask someone, what are the major drivers of the Washington State economy, you're going to think of tech, you're going to think of aerospace, you think of maritime, you'll maybe think of some manufacturing, but very rarely will anyone say arts and culture. 10.8%, that is on par with all of those other industries. And so when you're thinking about what makes this state's economy move, it is art and culture. And so whether you recognize it or not, it is part of what is creating a healthy economy for the entire state of Washington. 187,196, very specific number, but that is the number of jobs that are provided directly by arts and culture. And so these are not just artists that are performing or creating works in galleries. This is also maybe the janitorial crew at a large hall. These are the economists or the folks that are working in finance in some of these organizations. These are the people that are the carpenters or the organized labor that is putting on a lot of these productions. But when you look at that number, 187,000 jobs, if any politician was to get up on stage and start talking about 187,000 jobs, a lot of ears start perking up. And so again, this is a direct influence on the way people pay their rents, the way that people pay their mortgages, put food on their table, and have an economic livelihood. So again, just pointing out that economically, arts and culture are a significant part of people's well-being in this state. And finally, $38.46, that is the amount that attendees spend on average with local merchants beyond the cost of admission. So on top of that $73 billion, you're also looking at another $40 per person for thousands of people that are running through different performances throughout the state to local small businesses. And so those are hotels and restaurants and coffee shops and small businesses that are selling products next to theaters or on main streets. And so not only are you talking about the $73 billion that is directly attributed to arts and culture activity, but you're also talking about an additional multiplier that is helping small business, whether it's downtown or Main Street or in your suburban areas. So the thing that I like to really press on about the economic situation is this doesn't matter whether you like art or not, right? And I hope, and we'll get into kind of the intrinsic value of art and culture and whether what that does for your soul. But there are a lot of people that quite honestly, don't care. They don't know that they care, and they don't want to know that they care. But I say that's fine. If any one of these three, or if all three of these things disappeared tomorrow, we would be in a world of hurt as far as communities are concerned. If we were to lose $73 billion worth of our GDP, we were to lose 187,000 jobs, or if small businesses were to lose, tens of millions of dollars in, multiplier effect from surrounding businesses, that would be a disaster. So even if you're not into it for the art, quote unquote, it is still important to recognize that these are areas and these are, sectors that are providing health and economic well-being for your constituents, for the voters in your area, or for people that are buying your goods and services. So again, economics is a huge part of what arts and culture bring to the state of Washington, to our resilience and our ability to be strong as a community. So next slide. But health and well-being. This is something that I am only tangentially involved in, and I feel ill-prepared to talk about health and well-being in a crowd with as many experts as are here today, but I hope that some of you can identify with some of these numbers. 23%, that is the percentage points that at risk, and you can define that however you want, students involved in arts and culture are more likely to attend college. And you can Google art and educational attainment, but there are hundreds and hundreds of papers that are out there that show there's a direct link between young people's ability, access, and engaging with arts and culture and their ability to succeed in school. And we all know that young people who are better prepared educationally do better in all aspects of life. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go to college, but being more educated has positive correlation with all sorts of other outcomes, health and wellness, and also just for community engagement, not to mention that young people who are getting better jobs are contributing to a larger tax base in the future as well. So arts and culture is not the way the only way to get kids to graduate or to have a better education. But if it is a low-cost intervention that helps to get young people to succeed in an educational environment, I'd say that is an area that we need to look at. And 23 percentage points is a number that would jump out to me if I was looking for solutions along that line. 45%, that is the number of medical institutions nationwide that offers some type of arts programming. And 8 out of 10 of those, 80%, say that they do so in order to benefit patient recovery. This is a question that a lot of us have been grappling with, and so we're talking a lot. There's not a lot of data out there quite yet, but we're starting to talk to big pharmaceuticals and insurance companies, because as it stands, most of the interventions in the healthcare system end up being pharmaceutical, and they are very expensive. Now, they're necessary, but are there low-cost interventions that we can also add into the mix that can help people with faster recovery, better pain management, et cetera, that we know can complement some of the more traditional methods to move people through the healthcare system? And art has been shown, again, engagement with art and culture as a way to do that. So once again, these are low-cost interventions that we are able to promote and to fund within our community that just helps create better outcomes for some of the most vulnerable within our society. And they should be complementing some of the more traditional methods that we're using. So again, and then 32% is reduction in risk of developing depression for adults over 50 who are attending a cultural event. I think it's every month or every few months. There's so much data out there right now about the effects of isolation and social isolation, particularly, COVID really accelerated things, but someone said this to me, I think, better than anyone. They said, we're going to become more digital than less. And as we move more into a digital realm, we really have to grapple with this idea of the more time we're engaging socially in a digital realm, the less time we're spending face-to-face with others. And that is creating an epidemic of social isolation. And there's another data point on the next slide, but you can see that, again, just introducing arts and culture is a way to mitigate some of the damage that is being done by just not being face-to-face with people as much anymore. And I still don't think any of us have a good idea of what the full outcome of that is going to be, but we do know that if we can create access to things like arts and culture within our communities and create gathering spaces for people to come together, then we are going to slow down the damage of that type of social isolation. So again, with health and well-being, you're looking at education, you're looking at medical intervention, you're looking at social isolation. These are all areas in which a healthy and robust arts and culture community can provide just a support for communities that are struggling with anything that may come in the future. Next slide. See how it goes? All right. And finally, we'll look at community engagement. 7%, that is the percentage of more active voters in Washington state counties with a higher density of arts and cultural institutions. Now, you all are acting as some guinea pigs to some new data that we have just put together. We're putting together we've got a research study that is coming out in March with a lot of really interesting data that we pulled together in combination with SMU Data Arts out of Southern Methodist University, who does a lot of data research in arts and culture. But we looked to see what the correlations were between some really key health and community metrics and the funding and the accessibility of arts and culture were across different counties in the state. And one of the things that we found was statistically significant is that there are 7% more active voters in counties that have more access to arts and culture. Now, correlation does not mean causation, and so we're not saying that if you add another arts and culture organization, you're going to get more voters or anything like that, but it is not a coincidence that in counties that have more access or better access to arts and culture, you get more participation in civic engagement. And so if I'm a politician, this is something I want to look at. And if I'm a public sector official, I want to look and say, I want to dig into why is that, and what is it about engaging with the arts that makes people more civically engaged. And 16, that is the amount of more community gathering spaces, again, that are present in communities with a higher density of arts and culture. And by community spaces, we're talking about public libraries, we can talk about churches, we can talk about any area where people are able to come and gather. And I think what's most important about this is that we are now in an environment where, I don't want to say we're as polarized as we've ever been, because we did have a civil war at one point, so that was pretty polarized. But we are in a position where the echo chambers are pretty deep, and the digital gathering spaces that we all seem to find ourselves in are curated in a way to keep us in those spaces with people that are like us. Physical community gathering spaces are places where we can test our ideas and speak to others in our community in a way that is not as threatening, that is not as polarized as some of the ways that we have found, or some of the places we found ourselves in digitally. And so the more spaces that we can create like this, the more often you can run into a conversation that is with someone that is not necessarily of your opinion. And you can do it in a way that is maybe designed around art and culture, designed around a dance or a theater production or a piece of art that is far less threatening than in a poll booth or in a police station or in a courtroom. I think quite often we have a lack of spaces that are low stakes to have conversations with others that have different opinions. And arts and culture offer that space and that place of conversation so you can come together. One of the things, and then I'm going to jump off my political tangent here, but nationally, arts and culture have been almost equally funded throughout all administrations, both Republican and Democrat, through, I think the past 50 years. And so there are conversations to be had around art and culture on both sides of the aisles. And so the more spaces that we have that invite that conversation, I think the less polarized we will be when it comes to the really big decisions that we have to make as communities. So, and then finally, 82%, that is the percent of respondents that say being engaged with arts and culture leads to significantly higher feelings of social connectedness. Again, 82%. It's just a huge number. We know that being involved in some type of art and culture is a way to come together with other humans. And we are just dangerously unaware of the effects that we are having right now on each other, and especially our young people. I've got two kids, they're 11 and 14, and prying them from those phones is a disaster, right? But what is the long-term effect of that? And how can we present something that is equally as attractive that also allows them to connect with other humans and other ideas? And art and culture is a proven way to do that. So how do we get that access that is well-funded and available for everybody? So again, we're looking at better civic engagement. We're looking at better ways to communicate and gather, and again, less social isolation. All of that is being offered through a healthy and robust arts and culture community. So next slide. How does that really affect our future preparedness? I mean, I've been talking around it here for a while now. I guess, well, we're doing good. But when you look at what do you want a community to be strong in order to better be prepared for its future, we're looking at economics, we're looking at health and well-being, and we're looking at community engagement. And we have a great test that we all just went through. In terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, communities that were more economically prepared did better. Everyone in here can attest to the fact that, if you were coming at the pandemic from a higher health and wellness, whether it's physical health or mental health baseline, you fared better. Your community fared better. And in addition, if your community was stronger and more engaged and more in conversation with each other, you had a better opportunity to come to make some of those really hard decisions that we had to make during COVID-19. So whatever the next, I'm not saying it's a pandemic or it's going to be an economic meltdown or a political meltdown, but whatever it is, if we can be strong along these three dimensions, we're going to do better as communities. And one of the ways that we can do that is by encouraging our public, private, and nonprofit decision makers to fund a healthy, accessible, and robust arts and culture community within our different neighborhoods. And that's kind of the point of what we're trying to get across through this presentation and at ArtsFund in general. So if you go to the next slide. If we revisit this thesis again that a healthy and well-funded arts and culture community create economic, physical, and community resilience that prepares regions for constructive change and growth. I've been trying to frame it in terms of kind of the unknown unknowns or whatever the next catastrophe will be, but I think we can also look at it in terms of change and growth. The other thing that really blows my mind about the direction that we're going is that the pace of growth, positive growth that we've seen within our communities has been exponential over the past 10, 15, 20 years. And when I look at my children and I think, well, what is their world going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now? I have no idea. And I have to question, how prepared are we as humans to really react to this level of change and growth? And I don't know, because we are moving at breakneck speed, and it is difficult for communities to react. We see it all over the world, and I think that just the pace of change is something that we're all struggling with. And so it may not be another pandemic, but it may just be flying cars or whatever the next thing is that we're trying to grapple with. And that could be AI, it could be quantum computing, it could be whatever that next thing is that we're having trouble with recognizing. What are the moral implications? What are the social implications? All of those questions and all of that kind of internal understanding can be helped by having a thriving and accessible arts and culture community, because it allows for that economic community resilience and health and well-being to be strong. So this is, again, on top of all the other levers that we have to pull, but I would challenge anyone to not include arts and culture as a way to really prepare our communities for the future. So with that, I think that's the end of what we got. If we go next slide, we'll move into some Q&A, and please push back and let me know what you think or any questions related to whatever sectors that you're at. Are we doing on time? Thank you, guys. Good, thank you.
So thank you, and it's finally great to meet you in person.
I know.
We met on Zoom.
I know.
So I'll be facilitating the Q&A, but I want to, before we pass the mic to other folks, I want to ask you a question that I just kept thinking about. So maybe I'll just take the first opportunity. So you talked about the value of arts and communities and how that leads to growth in GDP, well-being, how it leads to a larger tax base. And I kept thinking about what are strategies or ideas that you have around growing people's creativity. One of the things that I think about is that people are very creative generally, and they have a lot of ideas, but maybe are not given the opportunity to expand on that creativity. So what are your thoughts around how can organizations like the ones that are here today help people bring out some of that creativity that leads to some of the growth that you talked about?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and I'll reframe it a little bit, because this is what we talk about with a lot of our corporate leaders. Is everybody is engaged in creativity every day, at every level. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter the clothes you put on in the morning, the car you drive, the house you live in. There is a creative aspect to almost everything that we do, to the point that we take it for granted. And I think what we really need to be talking about is not how do we introduce creativity into people's lives, it's how do we get them to recognize the creative endeavors that are part of their everyday life. I mean, the choices that we make on a daily basis are so heavily driven by creativity. But so many of us don't see the color of our shoes or the what we decide to turn on in terms of watching a movie or something like that, or what commercials we identify with. I mean, these are all, there is a creative aspect to almost everything. So I almost say, instead of, because some people are like, well, do I have to go out and do art? No, you don't need to go out and do art. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to do that if you want to. You can learn music, you can learn, painting, all of that. But you can also just identify that there's a creative aspect to absolutely everything around you. And I think that is almost more powerful, because then you start to realize the real power of creativity. It's not just in those kooky artists that live over there. You know what I mean? Creativity is a part of everything that you do, and it's a part of every way that you approach food, culinary arts, what you eat, what you wear, what you drive, where you live. There's such a creative aspect to all of it. So I think that's really the question that we want to be kind of pushing on people, is where is creativity in your own life?
I love that. Thank you.
Yep.
What are questions from folks? Question right there.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation and the data. The data was so helpful on framing this. I feel like in a lot of our communities, we segregate our art. And there's this Latinx group, and there's this BIPOC group, or this Black group, or this Indigenous group. And when we do share our art, there's this sense of, we want something really sensational, exotic, different. But we all have stories, and we all have ways of expressing our stories, and we miss out on so much of each other's stories. What tips or advice do you have for us for integrating our art and culture spaces?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. But one thing, intersectionality is key, right? And not just in art, but in all of these conversations that we have about equity, about how people are interacting with all types of health and human services. And I think there's two things I want to say. I'll start with that approaching how you ingest life through an intersectional lens is really important. It is critical that we uplift and support specific communities that have been isolated, or worse yet, not able to, that have not been able to partake in some of the growth, whether it be economic or whether it be artistic or what have you. So I think there is a need to uplift Black art. There's a need to uplift Latinx art. That is necessary. But I think once you do that, you can look at it through the intersectionality of well, where does that fit in within the culture? That why is it Black art? Why and that is because it lives in a dominant culture. That is because it lives in a culture that has been formed by 250 years of this, that, and the other. And so I think that if you can look at some of these through an intersectional lens, then you start to piece it all together, and then you can look at two things next to each other and relate them together, as opposed to saying these are two separate things, but seeing why is that Black art Black? Because it is not part of the other culture that, whether it's dominant white culture, whether it's Asian culture, whatever it is, it fits in juxtaposition to something else. So that's one thing. But you hit on something that I think is really smart, and this is something that we have found with everyone coming back, quote unquote, into art spaces. In order to get people out of Netflix or out of their whatever and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I mean, there is great art being done on that platform and in other platforms. And if you can get a 96-inch TV and surround sound, and I mean, that is a better experience in some ways than what you had 25 years ago in a live concert hall. But what we found is that everything needs to be a blockbuster. In order to get people out, everything has to be the best thing that they've ever seen. That is impossible to do. It's impossible to have a weekly performance of the best thing ever. Just by definition, doesn't work that way. And so I think one of the problems that we have right now is getting people to experience art not just for the biggest and the best, but just as like a way to just to have it like kind of fold into the part of everyday life. You know, the toast and eggs that you have in the morning don't have to be the best toast and eggs that you ever had every morning, right? But it is part of that sustenance that you have every day. So how do you relate with art and culture in that same way? So it's a tough question. I don't have an answer to it altogether, but if let's connect afterwards and we can work on it together. So, question over there.
Hi, so my question has to do primarily with youth mental health. So I saw some of the data that you had shared, and you had indicated that one, the at-risk youth, being able to go to college, that percentage, and then the adults over age 50 and the percentage of depression, that it could lower chances of developing depression. And so I'm curious, one, do you collect data on specifically how arts, the programs you've funded, you've supported, have impacted, one, the development of youth mental health, the effectiveness of youth mental health programs, and I'm going to get kind of granular here, but specifically how art can help support recovery from trauma or ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, because what I'm seeing here, my main pull here through my lens is this seems like all pathways towards PACEs, which are positive and compensatory experiences for all of our community members. So I'm just wondering if that's data that you actively pull or have historically pulled, or maybe you can share some insights on how this has impacted that world, shall we say.
Yep, that's a great question, and that brings, I think, so there needs to be more collaboration between youth mental health or just health and wellness in general and say small to medium-sized arts organizations, because we do not collect that data. We collect data, you know, through our partner organizations, but if you're a $75,000 organization, you don't know the first thing, like that does music, right? Music intervention for young people. You don't know the first thing about how to collect that data correctly, right? And that's another thing is, a lot of times we can do more harm than good by collecting data in ways that is not the correct way to do that. So we lean on organizations that do this at a larger scale, but it doesn't capture everybody. And one organization that I'll kind of point out is Path with Art. Is anyone in here familiar with Path with Art? Right, yeah, so they do that work with adults facing trauma, and they have a lot of data around that because that is specifically what they do. They work with adults that have, faced trauma through arts and culture, and all of their artists are recommended through social service organizations, and it's a fantastic organization, and I look them up, but they don't work with youth. And I don't know the details around that. I know that collecting data from youth and collecting data around mental wellness, you got a lot of walls that go up in order to do that. But and please reach out. My contact is available online. If you've got suggestions on ways that we could make it easier for small organizations to collect that data and then roll it up to us or to other organizations to kind of put together and do some analysis on, I'd be more than interested.
So we got 5 minutes for questions, and I see a question right here with Keiko.
Thank you so much. I'm curious about what you said about civic engagement and arts access, and specifically tying it to Ara's point about youth as well, the measure that you quoted about at-risk youth, and it made me think immediately of the work I used to do in the public education K-12 systems, where those youth who are the most, at risk of not graduating, often don't fit within the neurotypical realm, often, facing other disabilities. For them, art is a lifeline. Choir, band, theater programs. That's where you find these kids who are incredibly creative. And to your point, Marco, that there's an intensity of their experience that is just beautiful to see. And it's often where you find kids with disabilities. That's really the only place, like with physical disabilities or other disabilities, that's the only place that they're present with the general education setting. So just love to hear more about what can we do to just really advocate for arts programs that are often on the cutting table? It's not seen as essential. And how can we show up for public education, which is one of our greatest, if you think of the collective body, public education is one of the great organs of that body.
Oh my goodness, without a doubt. And there's two ways that I want to approach that question. One is like, how many movies can we all, rattle off about how sports saved the life of a young kid? Right? Like, I mean, they make a new one probably every other month. And it's true, I'm not poking fun at it. It is true. Well, it's because it gives them focus, it gives them discipline, it gives them direction. The same thing that choir does, the same thing that band does, the same thing that theater programs do. Getting kids attached to something that they believe in and that they can channel discipline into is super important. Now, for a number of different reasons, what we have done effectively since, I would say, probably the early 80s is offshore the arts and cultural programming to nonprofits without outsourcing the funding in the same levels, right? So, I mean, there's a kind of a mechanical way that this has been pretty insidiously done throughout K through 12 public education. And I'm sure you're aware of this, where, those programs are first on the chopping block, but then they reach out to your local ballet or symphony or whoever it is and say, oh, well, can you come in and do these programs? And we're not going to pay you for it, or we're going to pay you, a couple cents on the dollar for what we would have done it in-house. And I think the greatest thing to look at is, look around at, I'd say, our parents or, people that are, I'd say, in their maybe 70s and above, and everyone talks about having a full complement of arts and culture in K through 12, irrespective of the, kind of the social demographic that they were in. And that made a difference. I mean, and those are our donors. Those are the people that are really, so I think if you, there's a knock-on effect as well as making sure that young people have a experience with arts and culture, whether they're at risk or not. Because, you talk about to anyone about like, oh yeah, what's your memory of throwing a ball around with your dad? Well, yeah, I can see how sports makes a difference. Well, what's that memory of playing music with your dad or with your brother or sister or whoever it is? Those are the memories that we're trying to establish in people in their 30s instead of when they're 6. And it's so much easier to do when they're 5 or 6. So, yeah, I think that anyone that is in a position to advocate for more direct funding for arts and culture within K through 12 should be doing that.
Thank you, Michael. Can we get a round of applause for Michael Greer?
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all. I'll just share really quickly that my contact information is available online at artsfund.org, or you can reach out to anyone at Northsound ACH and they'll share that with you, because I would love to be in conversation with anyone who is looking at more intersectionality between other community health interventions in arts and culture. So thank you all very much. Thank you.